nobody would go to Monaghan to stay. And the war came, and lots of people wanted to come here, mainly people who had daddies away at the war in different countries. So there were a lot of children living in the house, and it was really, it was, I suppose, though we didn't know it, it was a wonderful experience. And we had no shortage of amusements and fun and games, and it was kind of idyllic with the Daly girls who lived in the houses down there, and they used to join us. And sorry, what was your question? I've forgotten.
Yes.
No, I was asking about this room.
Oh yes,
specifically.
Well,
yeah.
that was that era, and then later on, when my father returned from what was then Palestine, we stayed as paying guests here, and I was a bit older, and it wasn't, the other children had gone back to where they lived, and it wasn't so interesting. And then several years later, when I was a teenager, and my father had retired, and Mrs. Guthrie and Tyrone asked him, would he come and manage the estate? And I suppose they debated it, and he came, and it was a very big agricultural estate at the time, and we lived in this part of the house. As you step through the door from the top of the stairs, this whole L-shaped section of the bedrooms were made into an apartment for us. And I remember saying to my mother, is this like a Mayfair apartment? And she said, yes, but much bigger. And the room next there was made into a kitchen for us with a range and all that. There was still no electric light. This was the 1940s, was it? No, 50s, early 50s. And this was the sitting room of our apartment. And we had a turf fire here, and there, against that wall, was a curly sofa that we still have in our parlour in Dunleary. And I remember some of the pictures that were around the walls. So this was our sitting room. The next room was our kitchen. The next room was our dining room, and a little hatch was made between the kitchen and the dining room, so that we had a maid, could push through the dishes at meals, and then the bedrooms up this way where we slept. But the furthest bedroom, the blue room, where my parents slept, was the room that I described on our very first visit, when I came with my mother, and the yellow porcelain cat was, and the pole that went ting. And also, very interestingly, historically, the chimney piece that came from the old house in Philadelphia. It's there, and you can still see it. So this was our apartment. And we came up and down by the back stairs. We didn't go through Mrs. Guthrie's house. And my mother, who was very sociable, liked to be back in Monaghan because she had a lot of relatives here. And she also liked to nip down to talk to Mrs. Guthrie and Miss Warby, her companion. Mrs. Guthrie was blind, and she had this nurse companion who not only looked after her, but also looked after the domestic arrangements of the downstairs house, where there was still a large staff. So this was our drawing room.
And Christopher, wasn't your mother related to the family? Was your mother related to the family?
I can't hear.
Was your mother related to the Guthrie family?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
We were what Mrs. Guthrie's daughter, Peggy Guthrie, who married Hubert Butler, and whose daughter is Julia Crampton, who is exactly my age and lives in America, and she was one of the children who stayed here during the war. And my mother said we were not relatives, we were connections, which was quite different. And in fact, as connections, we were much more friendly than perhaps relatives would have been. And the connections go back right into the early 19th century. There was an ancestor called Elizabeth Foster in Newbliss, who there are documents from, and she was a huge chum of Dame Martha Power, who lived here, who had been Miss Moorhead of Newbliss. So that was connections. Then there were other connections, like my great uncle John of Smithborough, who was a doctor and died the year I was born, and he used to come over here regularly because his great chum was name James Dane. I never remember that name. James Dane was another relative of ours. He was a solicitor from County Fermanagh and was hired by Sir William Tyrone Power as agent and ran the agricultural estate at that time and lived in this house. And I don't know when the Guthries and Powers came back on the holidays, if he vacated or if he had a room at the back. History doesn't tell us. But he and my great uncle John, Dr. Elliot, used to go on shooting expeditions round here, which is a pity, and I'd love that to be erased from history. And I don't know if this estate is now a non-shooting estate. It is. That's not a thing I would have approved of. And then in the next generation, my mother and Peggy Butler, were great chums. So there was constant coming and going. And Elizabeth Foster, the first lady I described to you from Newbliss, was such a chum of Dame Martha Power here that she came to live here in old age and actually died here. And my mother's mother, my grandmother, when she was very ancient and we were living here, she came here and died. So, not in this room. She died in the room up there. I was a teenager at that time. But, and I'm going to finish now, during that era, I was at boarding school in Dublin and came back every holidays to Annaghmakerrig and dreaded the thought. None of my chums were here, apart from the Daly girls who were almost grown up then and were pleasant and friendly. Nobody I knew. So the holidays when I was a young teenager were awfully dull. There was a total contrast to the 1940s when we were all small children. And I thought, gosh, I have to go back to Annaghmakerrig next week from school. Oh, it's going to be for 3 weeks. Oh.
And Chris, that party of cakes, the Christmas party, was that at the dining room we just had lunch at?
Yes.
Amazing. I mean, that just sounded magical. It sounded magical, all those cakes for the party.
Yes. And it's the same oval table
Amazing.
that there is today. And that oval table was bought by Sir William Tyrone Power because his children, I don't know who they were, there was apparently there was in the 19th century a lighter table, and the boys used to raise it up on their knees and things would get spilled, and he was so annoyed he bought that big heavy oval table that we sat round this afternoon.